So let's test out. We're in 1080p, quality auto on incognito. All right, we should have fixed that. Huge apologies to Birdbanes. Now, I'm not going to be able to see my VODs still. Yeah, but I could see this one. Yes, okay. Yikes. Almost forgot about that. All right, let's get back to it. Let's get back to it. I wanted to start the day off right with maybe a GACT video. Did we have a GACT video to watch? Oh no. What is pure consciousness? Is a new Alex O'Connor video? I can't hang. Can't keep up. All right, is the universe fair? Just okay, learning how to learn. Relationships. Man, I think we're already up. Hume's treatise. Oh, we have to put this to the save to watch later, but we cannot do that today. We cannot do that today. All right, we've got nothing to watch. So maybe we just start writing down takeaways here. Okay. Takeaways / ideas. All right, what was this first idea that I had? The first impulse versus the following thoughts, and I wanted to connect this to Sapolsky's morality discussion in Behave, the book Behave. So can you help me out with some thoughts I had when on a meditation retreat? All right, first one. The first impulse versus following thoughts. I should say subsequent thoughts. Connecting mindfulness and morality literature. Specifically, Sapolsky's discussion of when we are more moral via our intuitions versus subsequent thinking about the situation. All right. Did we disconnect, or is that just a second? Oh no, okay. I think that was because I restarted. All right, that was the first thing. First thing, check. All right, all of our thoughts are, okay, this was so then I started, I don't want to go into the full update until Dharmadam gets here. But I started listening to Joseph Goldstein's course on waking up. And that led to, let's just say takeaway. So let's do this. Joseph Goldstein's waking up course. From the intro. Something like, all our thoughts are invitations / opportunities. And then without expectations. I don't know if I want to do a quote because it's not a direct quote, but it's basically a quote. Quote. Don't believe it blindly, test it out. This is just stuff that I heard and thought sounded nice. Even suffering is an opportunity to learn, grow, or strengthen mind. And that's something that we found to be true at a deeper level than just the intuitive. Truer in a neurological sense. Strengthen out the mind. We could just do. All right, all right. Major theme. Okay. Major theme. Rather than simply experiencing boredom, I noticed how distracting stimulation can be. It was rather nice forcing myself to not muddy the water. Okay. What would it look like if I only had, if during a normal day I only had my day's intention or intentions in mind. All right, so this is going to be the major theme here. Let's put that first. All right, a random eye. Okay, that was another one. Oh, this is crazy. This is a controversial idea. We got to get this one out before anyone shows up. Controversial idea. Buddhist idealism has a tendency to fall into some sort of physicalism, as it gives realism to bottom-up signals rather than as it I don't know, as it relies on the framing of true bottom-up signals. In other words, gives them some sort of realism rather than experience interpretation itself. I don't know if this is the most compelling second part of this. It's like rather than any other framings, or simply relying on a completely contentless, conceptless, on a more abstract Okay. This is something we have to put into here. Controversial idea. Buddhist idealism has a tendency to fall into some sort of physicalism as it relies on the framing of true bottom-up signals. In other words, gives them some sort of realism rather than other framings. Or, of course, I know it does use other framings. It's just that the body seems to be a central framing that it leverages, even though I'm going to do another ... even though I know that Buddhism does not commit to any sort of realism about the body. Which, of course, Buddhism also leverages significantly. All right. Wanted to add a bunch of stipulations there because if I don't be careful about that, then it's going to yell at me and people are going to be upset. All right. Okay, my progress has revealed, so this is another major theme. My progress has revealed the scope of practice. Can we get an M dash? Who's got an M dash for us? There we go. Both what my practice has already affected in my own experience, but also how much more can be learned / internalized / conditioned, and how long that might take. This is kind of obvious. It's just there's a long way I can go in terms of changing how the brain operates automatically, and you just kind of get a sense of that. It's, you know, I guess you could say that it's similar to weightlifting, but with weightlifting, you're always at this like current amount of weight, and then higher than that is kind of out of view already. So this might be a little different. I wonder what this might be. Something like Rocket League. Rocket League is a good example where you start realizing that you can learn some of these skills like dribbling, and then that makes you realize like, oh wait, if I just were to do this same type of thing, the same type of practice, I might be able to learn how to air dribble or something like that. Yo, Energy Dompter, since it's Friday, may I ask a question which is not related to the document? Maybe. It depends if it's, I guess, related to anything that might be helpful for us. I do want to follow some schedule today of things that I have that I want to talk about, but especially since no one else is asking for anything right now, go for it. All right, so this isn't something I need to throw into Gemini. It's going to just tell you, good job, and you're right. Because obviously this, you know, a mindfulness practice needs to take a long time. All right, a feeling of safety, of refuge from the mind and all its circumstances. All right. This was, yeah, this is up in this idea. / refuge from the mind and all its circumstances. Which would be something like situations, constraints, nice, environments. So I want to do environments, situations, constraints, and then obviously narratives, logic, and rules. Did I put major theme? Okay, and then let's add this guy here. Let's add this guy here. Oh, this yogi is rich. What's good, Dom? I'm going over takeaways and ideas. And then we're going to see what Gemini can say about them. All right. Do you believe that loop quantum gravity relativity more aligns with Occam's razor as a theory of quantum gravity compared to string theory? I don't know enough about string theory, unfortunately. And I don't know enough about loop quantum gravity. And I don't think that this might be a good time to learn those things. I actually don't really think I'm going to ever need to learn those things. But he descends from the peaks of ecstasy to breathe secular pragmatic wisdom into our minds. Hell yeah. More on that later today. I've got a bunch that I want to go over. Some exciting thoughts. Actually, that was a thought I came up with today, so nothing to do with the retreat. But the retreat went well. It was both easier than I expected in terms of earlier in the day staying focused for longer periods of time, but then harder in the sense that by the afternoon I was so shot that obviously I continued and I followed the schedule, but I could tell like I could not as effectively focus on anything that I tried focusing on. So I kind of tried pivoting some of the exercises into more open monitoring, and later in the day, like at the very end of the day, it was all about yoga nidra and body scans. Everything to do with the retreat, the mighty afterglow for sure. Yeah, it was nice. It was just as predicted. Nice. Yep. It's tricky because I don't want to do a half day and then like go online and do a bunch of stuff that's gonna obviously be much more stimulating than the practice. So I think I would just do another day retreat and just keep in mind the type of practice I would need to do throughout the day and type of energy I'm going to need throughout the day. But yeah, the major theme was, okay, rather than simply experiencing boredom, I noticed how distracting stimulation can be. So I was actually like pretty stoked at how a few hours in, I was totally fine with what was going on. And also realizing like when I usually go about my day, I'm like constantly getting something that's completely changing up what is happening in my mind, which is not necessarily negative. It's just, it's cool to actually see that more closely. It was rather nice forcing myself to not muddy the water. And even when I let a thought come through, like I had those little thinking windows, I realized like committing to a thought like that, even just something simple where you just make it and you write it down, like that'll put you onto a trajectory, especially since you're doing nothing otherwise. Like that's now going to capture your mind for a while. Glad it went well. Yeah, no, I definitely enjoyed it. It was like it felt like an R&R day. It felt like a really chill day. Just a very, very relaxing, but also engaging. Like it wasn't boring, as I mentioned. Like there was always something to do. I think that goes to the schedule also. I filled it up with a lot of fun stuff. Paper tire. The time of it. My understanding is that loop quantum gravity believes the theory of general relativity that gravity is a result of space-time curvature can be explained by quantum physics, where space-time is quantized. Yeah, I just don't know enough about physics to have an opinion on this. I would have to learn to know where the space is currently at and where we should navigate in that space. But yeah, it's really not important for anything that we do on this channel, and I think it's too out there for me to even really be interested outside of the stream. It's not practical in my mind to know that, to have one of those. I hate Occam's razor. Fair enough. All right, then I had a comment. My progress has revealed the scope of practice, both what my practice has already affected in my own life and experience, but also how much more can be learned, internalized, conditioned, and how long that might take. So this is an obvious one. There's nothing crazy about this. I'm not even throwing it into the Gemini conversation because I don't want it to take up any time speaking on that. That one's just pretty obvious. I should start going through. So everything was okay. Everything's pretty much there. Even calm music, I was like a little weird about this early in the morning. Though I think it was nice. I think it was fine. So the guided meditation, I found Joseph Goldstein on Waking Up, and I went to his course, and I pressed play, and I thought that his intro was like 1 minute 30 seconds or something, or maybe it was like 1 minute and some small amount of seconds. So I was like, okay, I'll do this, and then I'll do his first actual meditation, and that'll be my opening guided meditation. But then I realized that the intro, which was more of a lecture, or more of just like the same thing that we've been noticing, like when there's a guy in front of a room kneeling or whatnot, and then just like explaining or sitting and then explaining something. That was more of what it was, and it was actually an hour and sometimes. So I actually kept that on during this as I did just, I kept a still posture, listened to it, which I thought was nice. It was a great way to start the day. It was a great framing to set the day up, set up an intention for the day. I kept that on during the mindful break. And then also during the thinking window, which really wasn't too much thinking. It was kind of me writing down the stuff that I'm writing down right now. And also some of the stuff that specifically came from that course, which these were like basically quotes. All our thoughts are invitations / opportunities without expectations. And then don't believe a thought blindly, test it out, he said. And then even suffering is an opportunity to learn / grow, strengthen our mind. I don't know if that was him or me, but that's obviously something akin to what we've talked about in the past. All right, then that leaves us to the walking meditation. So I think I was just finishing up that when I started walking. Basically just went to a park or two and sat down, chilled, was basically doing a breath focused attention while also kind of noticing how my visual consciousness was affecting the trajectory of my thoughts, and also just what's going on in the background of my actual breathing exercise. Then we got a mindful break, water, snack. Yeah, I was just being chill, mindful during this. It was great. Seated, unguided, open awareness. So this is pretty clear cut. I just did one of those. So one of the things I noticed probably around here, especially around like the mindfulness lunch and thinking. So I'll keep going. Simple activity. I think at this point, I didn't want to go to an activity because I wanted to stay grounded. So I think I might have just continued doing, I think I started the guided body scan early because I didn't want to do something else that would have had me off course. Gentle yoga and mindful stretching. Okay, I actually did that. I'm definitely out of my game in terms of yoga. I want to get back into that. Mindful lunch and thinking window. Yep. Yeah, and then around here, I was thinking I need to start throwing in more just regular meditations, even if they were short, just so that I stay grounded and stay chill, so that I don't let my mind go too far away, which was largely good for much of the first part of the day. I did do this fun blindfolded texture exploration thing. It was pretty simple. It was just a focused attention on, it's like not even a body scan, but it's kind of like a body scan where you're just focusing on where your touch is hitting the object and then trying to get rid of the thought about the object or your hands. And then I did that silly household mandalas thing, even though it was pretty cool and very chill. This one was, there wasn't much thought to be had elsewhere because I was too focused on working it. So this was actually kind of perfect. It's like you don't have to practice like real focused attention, but you will be focused because you're doing something that is genuinely more engaging than everything else so far you've done today, except for maybe yoga. All right, video meditation. I did do this. Thought it was chill. It was great to get a little green and outdoors sounds. Mindful strength training. This was nice. Mindful dinner. Walking. Did another walking. And this was more of an open monitoring walk, as well as just trying to feel out my feet and legs. More mindful chores, mindful shower. I did the old pitch black shower, even though I can't really do it completely pitch black because there's too much light in my apartment. So it sneaks into the, like, under the bathroom door. Okay, so then this is when we started the metta exercise. I did the kneeling guided metta, which was great. This was from Sam. I found he had a loving kindness course, so I did his. Did this whole thing where I just kind of lied down while a window was open, which was nice because it was not too cold yesterday. This olfactory deconstruction thing was pretty silly, so I ended up doing it only like 10 minutes. It was interesting to just kind of see what the conscious aspects of a smell is like, which you really don't get in your larger practice. I mean, of course, some smell can arise and you can think about it in that moment, but it usually doesn't linger. It doesn't stay. Yeah, I've done that course. Nice. Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, I felt good about it. I think I was... The nice thing was that I was able to then, this was like a perfect lineup because I was able to get the metta framing in my mind and the practice, and then I do the Windows sound meditation. This was less about just a sound meditation. This became kind of like a sound meditation and a metta meditation as I heard people walking by. And Sam gets to a point where he even like says, like, now imagine this for everyone in your city. And so this was like, okay, perfect. Easy enough. Candle gazing, I really did not have luck with. I think I did it correctly. Maybe I should have done longer. I think I was doing like 20 seconds-ish. But I couldn't know. I could notice just like an absence of light when I closed my eyes. It's not like any image came. It was just this like pounding absence of light that I think was I don't know, offsetting the looking at the candle. So at this point, freeform thinking window, I did not want to do thinking. I think I was done with writing notes and thinking by this point because I knew it would make my mind go crazy. So I think this ended up just being I started doing more. I started the yoga nidra stuff here, and I almost fell asleep sometime around here, which I knew I shouldn't do because then I would never fall asleep at night. Joke's on me, I ended up having terrible sleep last night. Probably because, I don't know, I exhausted myself too much. I don't know. Didn't end up doing gentle yoga. I ended up just continuing the yoga nidra stuff with a little bit of stretching. Yep, and I did that until the rest/tea. Didn't end up doing the video meditation. I actually went straight into doing more yoga nidra with the weighted diaphragmatic tracking. And I didn't do a seated thing here. I did a prone. I continued doing the yoga nidra stuff because it was really hitting. It was just the amount of attention that I really need or really was able to give. Yeah, it was very chill. I did experience back pain for sure, which also made me not want to stay seated. But I was more just concerned about my general energy. I was dead by, and I think it could also have to do with the fact that I did a ton of walking, and I did the strength training, and I did the yoga, and I'm doing the meditations. So I might have overdone it with activity, and I will need to keep that in mind next time. So let's write that down. This schedule was too physical activity intensive. It contributed to me being pretty burnt out by the later afternoon and evening. Which was fine, as it led me to a bunch of guided yoga nidra. But I would like to have a little more energy for perhaps more. Actually, even for those, for giving my attention. All right. So then I had this other crazy idea that I'm gonna just throw out there. It's not great. I don't know if you'll be stoked about it, but I noticed, and when I noticed this when listening to Goldstein's course. Buddhist idealism has a tendency to fall into some sort of physicalism as it relies on the framing of. So it's not actually physicalism, but I should say physicalist framing, as it relies on the framing of quote-unquote true bottom-up signals, in other words, giving them some sort of realism, rather than other framings. Of course, I know that it does use other framings. It's just that the body seems to be a central framing, that it leverages a key framing, even though I know that Buddhism does not commit to any sort of realism about the body, or simply relying on more abstract, completely contentless, conceptless experience/interpretation, which of course Buddhism also leverages significantly. So it's just the tendency to leverage this idea of there being something true about these signals that you're experiencing, as if you're, yeah, it's actually, I shouldn't do just the physicalist, it's literally some sort of physicalism. Yeah, I think the idea is, in order to make it such that these bodily signals are providing some fundamental clear view of experience, you have to be relying on some sort of physicalism, or at least whatever you're bringing from your understanding of the physical world to fuel that, the realness there. I guess actually on another side, as a counter to that, as like a counter argument to that, it's really a realism of where you end up after being practiced, which happens to be something akin to clear awareness of bottom-up signals, more synchrony across the brain, and reduced chatter via DMN. So funny enough, it's like you could say that you get it all out of the idealism just because this is where people end up after the practice. Like they end up getting these clear signals, and they happen to be signals that we relate to our body, but you know, it is actually fundamentally idealist. Right, it is fundamentally idealist. There is some bringing a concept of clarity to, like, as long as you bring this concept of clarity, then you are making an assumption about what is happening in the mind, like what is really happening in the mind. And you can get there. Yeah, it's really an idealist realism. So yeah, as I pointed out, this is the counter argument. It's like, hey, we are just pointing out that this is what happens after you do this type of meditation, and we just happen to find out in 2020, in the 2020s, or you know, in the 21st century, that this clear awareness is actually just more higher fidelity bottom-up signals, which are coming from a physical body, and we can see the correlates of these signals. That's how we point out that meditation does this. So it has this maybe not a tendency. Tendency is not the right word. Has a I don't know, awkward, ironic orientation to falling into. In Theraveda, experiences the ultimate reality. Buddhism doesn't do much metaphysics, for example, the poison arrow parable, but if you look carefully, it is idealist. That is you projecting physicalism onto it. Fair, right? Right, so if we don't go as far as to do this, right, to bring my own understanding into it, right, my own physicalism into it, then we are left with just this. Like that clear means where we end up. And okay, so I should say, which by itself I might argue is some sort of fallacy. Of course, we now have an understanding of how this how these patterns correlate with the physical world, such that we can understand these clear signals through empirical ideas, empirical insights of, okay. And I wanted to make one comment. We now have an understanding of how these patterns correlate. So these patterns, which would be something like both state and trait, correlate with the physical world. So we understand why a yogi's practice is going to be different over time. We understand why they're going to experience the thing they experience in the moment. Oh, out of curiosity, what's your perspective on cognitive behavioral therapy? 2 thumbs up. I think it helps people, so we got to leverage it. If the fundamental goal is to escape rebirth, but Buddha is vague about what happens after, he does not have a kind of void in mind. There is some non-physical experience that's both preferable and not dependent on the physical. That is why it's hard to separate Buddhism from idealism. I agree. Yeah, I'm not trying to actually make some sort of like Buddhism is not idealism or idealist. Yeah, I'm really not trying to make any. This isn't even like a major insight about Buddhism. I'm just trying to point out the irony there, and that's not necessarily negative. It's just something we have to keep out. Now, this is kind of if someone tries to make this type of fallacy, then we can point that out. But it's really like we need to be careful when someone tries to point out that there's like a clearer experience or like a more true experience, clearer in a very specific metaphysical sense. We have to be careful when people are talking about metaphysics and Buddhism. And now this isn't me being cautious about the Buddha for sure. Definitely not. The Buddha's chill. He's got it right. He's got a lot of teachings that really fill out what's going on. This is more concern about someone that I might just be randomly talking with who has an audience of thousands and thousands of people, so that when they say something that I think is low dimensional, such that a bunch of people are going to now take something inappropriate from it, like they're going to take like, when you meditate you learn the true reality of the world, then I have to just speak up. And this is me training myself to do that. But for sure, this as an actual critique on the teachings is pretty weak, or at least just short-sighted in some sense. So I want to make that clear. This was just something I noticed yesterday. This is why it is hard to separate Buddhism from idealism. What if they view phenomenology as part of reality? Right now we're getting into the semantics of well, so even within those semantics, we can start trying to figure out what we could start making claims like, if that were to be the case, then even an untrained brain with all of its defilements is experiencing as true of a reality as the yogi is. That's what I would argue. If you're truly idealist, then that's the case. And we would want to try to look out for someone that makes the specific claim that a yogi gets to the more clear truth, when really reality is just consciousness. So phenomenology is showing you the true reality. That's how we would have to play our idealism. Wouldn't that make it a fair statement? Right. Doesn't that thinking render your original objection semantic? I didn't bring up the word real. Right. Yes. Right? So I said realism, right? As it relies on the framing of true bottom-up signals, in other words, gives them some sort of realism. So this is just specifically like if you're saying that over a meditation practice, you end up seeing the more real thing, which is, we can see right now that what you end up seeing is certainly different. Like it is not the same thing that you're noticing when you start out your practice. You're going to be noticing much less of the chatter. You're going to be noticing much more clear, phenomena before we even get to what is actually going on under the hood in a physicalist notion. So I would just point out that, like, hey, even where you end up is just as real as where you started, because what's real under an idealist framework is really just whatever consciousness gives you. And so I'm only pointing out that we need to be careful about anyone who purports that where you end up in a mindfulness practice has this ironic aspect of some physical realism, physicalist realism. Not worth derailing. I have two counterexamples in mind, but I want to hear what you experienced yesterday. Nice. All right, well, ooh, I might like losing my voice. I didn't speak at all yesterday. What's going on? I've barely spoken since this thing. Oh, I'm sorry. May I ask a question related to psychology and politics? Maybe. I mean, you can certainly try. Let's see. Depends how, because we've done a couple discussions about psychology, temperament, and politics in finding correlations between people's political outlooks and their temperament. And when I say that, I mean like how they answer a bunch of questions. Use it or lose it. Right, right, right. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So then, yeah, I had from that major theme a feeling of safety / refuge from the mind and all its circumstances. So this is all the stuff that like can your mind really gives you. And this is, I mean, this is now we're jumping back to in the pocket of our idealist framing of semantics. So all of our circumstances, which could be like all of our environments, every environment we find ourselves in, our situations, our constraints, the narratives, logic and rules, like these are all just kind of appearing to us in these thoughts. And the logic and rules one is going to be really important for next month, as we point out that most fundamentally what feels like it's logical, what feels logical, what feels rational is just this felt experience. And we can make sense of why you would have those types of rules arise by looking at how you learned them. You experience what you learn. Do you believe that the relative empirical evidence for cognitive behavioral therapy is a reason to support capitalism? This is going to be a huge jump. But let's see. How do you make this argument? Because of the principle that people would be relatively better off individually focused on their thoughts and habits rather than experience. Okay, let me restart here. Because of the principle, and when we say principle, we have to, like, I think what you're really trying to say is like the observation or the pattern that we are now interpreting as a principle. But when we talk about patterns of behavior that we observe, that doesn't make it a principle. It just makes it like a pattern that predicts what people would be doing. All right, because of the principle that people would be relatively better off individually focused, better off if individually focused on their thoughts and habits rather than expecting the political system to meet all their expectations. All right, first thing to point out is that there's many systems of economy and government that involve. So yeah, I guess the first thing is we have to be clear that we can, I know that government and economic system are often like connected, at least in our Western minds, but they don't have to be connected in this case. You could have capitalism under a non-democratic government, and you could have all kinds of systems that involve what you're getting at here. The other thing is there's other systems other than capitalism that allows the populace to not meet all their needs, of course, but it still involves them working, right? So this wouldn't be proof towards, or this wouldn't be an effective argument towards capitalism specifically because of both of those two things I just said now. Those are two huge flaws in this logic. rather than expecting the political system to meet all their expectations. For example, if I can't, so really, if I were to give the steel man of the argument that I think that you might be able to make, that I think we might still be able to assault, is because of what we see from cognitive behavioral therapy. Do we expect that individuals would be better off if given an economic system and a government system in which they aren't given all of their needs? And yeah, expectations wouldn't be the word here. It's like their basic needs or something like that. For example, if I can't afford a fancy car, I would be relatively better off accepting that as an individual. Also, there are Eastern capitalistic societies, right? In which they aren't, like, I don't know if capitalism equals individual. I mean, I guess there might be a correlation with that, but there might be like more Eastern cultures that also have capitalism, which would be like a third huge flaw in the framing here. So you might have more group-based, less individual societies that engage in capitalism, and they leverage their capital towards the group rather than their self. But yeah, I don't know. So let's just say we give the Steelman version of this thing. I don't know if you could I don't know if you can make the case, like you can draw the analogy from cognitive behavioral therapy, that it would now have some effect on macroeconomics, macro well-being, because it works for an individual and in a very different set of specific cognitive behavioral therapies, like specific practices. Like it's a huge jump to take like a cognitive behavioral therapy and then build that up to making a case about a much larger system that hits many different people. Like there could just be the case that, you know, a bunch of people getting this type of cognitive behavior therapy, if we're going to even grant that, wouldn't work out in the end for some reason. Like there's just some aspect of this equation that we're not taking into account that comes in, that is introduced once you incorporate the scale of a whole entire society's government or economic system. I don't know if you understand my argument. My argument is that capitalism, I view, encourages people to focus on their individual well-being through focusing on their thoughts and actions. So this is one. I just think you're bringing too much to capitalism. You're bringing too much of your culture's baggage towards this idea of capitalism, when capitalism takes many different shapes across the world. And then also, capitalism isn't the only system here that gives you what you're looking for, what you attribute to capitalism. So you're making the argument that that capitalism should be the winner because it gives you these things, when really, if there's other competitors that are giving you those same things, then even if I granted everything about your argument, you'd still be at a situation in which you haven't actually argued towards capitalism, but you've argued towards a set of different things, possible systems. Now, of course, you know, we're dealing with like really complex dynamics when dealing with a whole entire society and their culture and how those intertwine. So maybe this works for maybe you're just talking about the United States, right? Maybe you're pointing out that just in the United States, it makes sense to keep capitalism because of this individualistic look. And yeah, that argument is stronger, but it's still very low fidelity in terms of you just need a lot of jumps to make before you actually sufficiently make the argument that the entire government or economy should be capitalist. So I would say for this type of thing, we shouldn't operate off of these principles that aren't actually manifested within macro systems. Like we should set up a system and then measure the effects on the macro, on the society at large, And that's how you should draw your conclusions, rather than arrive at some intuition about a logical connection between a system's qualities, or what it does for an individual, what you think it does for an individual, and then blowing that up to, like that perhaps is a place to start your hypothesis, but now you have to test that out. You have to, so for you would want to do the meta-analysis of looking at different places across the world and see which ones actually have whatever you're looking for. And what it seems like you're looking for, because we're talking about cognitive behavioral therapy, is well-being. But we see that capitalism does not lead to significant well-being for a lot of the people in its populace, at least in the US. So we would want to look to the places that are more happy, and you end up finding those in decently egalitarian, I think, less capitalist societies. But I could be wrong about that as well. I'm just pointing out the types of things that you would need to do and potentially check. And if all those come back and you got your meta-analysis and you've determined that you have like a decent chance at bringing out this effect, then we would want to get there via, slight changes, so that we could easily measure whether we're actually getting to where we want to go. Okay. Stan has achieved 20% faster flow state by stilling his mind. That's kind of how it works, right? I mean, I'm not saying that there actually has been a significant effect based on one day of practice towards like my ability to focus through an answer here, but the practice since November has certainly affected my ability to pay attention during these streams, think about what I'm trying to think about, and think about this stuff offline, and also allows me to give more succinct responses. All right, to be fair, and please don't take this personally, I don't believe you generally understand macroeconomics relatively in depth. I certainly don't. I don't know macroeconomics at all, but I know that you'd have to look at macroeconomics in order to make a decision like this, or to make an argument like this. I don't need to know much about the ins and outs of macroeconomics. But if you know a lot about macroeconomics and you're leveraging that knowledge towards this argument, then you need to include that in your argument. You can't have an argument that is lacking those macroeconomics that is actually supplying the certainty that you feel about your own argument. You need to bring that in there. You got to use those reasons. That's what your meta-analysis needs to include. Did you still feel an afterglow the morning after? I think so. I did admittedly jump on Reddit like within the first 30 minutes of waking up. Just to see what happened in the last 24 hours. And I did check my texts and all that. But it did, it's nice to then ground like what I knew I experienced yesterday into today's experience, this moment, and notice my, how grounded I am, or my ability to grasp onto the present moment. And yeah, I think after doing it for a day, you definitely feel like you're at home doing that, which is great. Quieter head, tranquil. Yeah, and the other thing is like perhaps it has led to a more tranquil state. Bro, no devices for 10 days. It was so trippy checking the news. Oh my gosh. Especially like if I were to do that now, that like 10 days is a long time to go without the news. Who knows who we're going to be at war with? Who knows? My light's flickering. Yeah, who knows who's gonna have the tariffs? Yeah, it's been wild. It's been a wild 12 months. Okay, let us continue. We haven't finished these. All right. So this is another obvious one, but this is, I think, just a good point in general. There are so many aspects of this practice that seem conceptually obvious, right? So this is what I keep saying. However, as I continue to practice, I have to keep reminding myself, seriously though, as in, yes, it's that simple. Keep paying attention, something like that. As well as with more time, I'll realize how meaningful that simplicity is. And so I guess this is in the sense of I will have more associated understanding supporting I should just say that I'll have a more fleshed out understanding / interpretation of those same principles. I think that's what I'm trying to get at. Oh, imagine the Tibetans that do 4. I mean, yeah, once you do 4 years, like, I don't even know if I want to come back to a phone at all. Your uncle died 3 years ago. Oh, geez, yeah. If you found something like you found out something like that, that would be crushing. At that point, though, you might have already let go of everyone you knew. Like 4 years gone, and I feel like you aren't holding any aspect of yourself and your relationships as I want to say as important not in like a, it's not like you don't care about them. Like, chances are you care about them more now, but you hold that expectation that they're going to be there lessened. So it's not going to be as much of a blow if you find out that they're gone, because you've already given up everything. You've given up your all properties, all aspects of self. But you're at a position where you can now give so much more intense loving kindness to the relationships you still have. All right, do you believe meditating on a thought related to theoretical physics or another relatively complex subject matter is effective at achieving the goals of mindfulness meditation? Out of curiosity, it depends. It depends what we mean by focusing on the thought. So if you were to leverage that thought as like a mantra and you didn't do much dynamic thinking, like reasoning and thinking about something and what it means, but if you just kept a mantra that was decently simple, then it does seem like, yes, that can have an effect. But if you're actually thinking about something, like if you're meditating on it in the sense that you are thinking how to solve this problem, then no, that you're actually just making things worse in some respects. Like, you're letting your DMN just run rampant. Now, you might still like increase focus. Like, I think studying for school probably still builds a trait of focus. And so it's really effective to have kids start studying when they're kids and not when they're 18-year-olds in college, because you want them to actually develop with this exercise that will actually affect their brain. So I do think, though, that you lose a lot of the benefits of mindfulness meditation if you are doing more complex thinking rather than simply focusing on something that's very simple, like your breath, even though it is dynamic, or something very simple as a mantra, which shouldn't, you really don't want the mantra to bring out a bunch of thoughts, and you don't want to traverse those thoughts. I mean, you can notice those thoughts, of course, but yeah, so that's my guess, that answer. All right, bear attention, the base of all comprehension. An old lyric of mine. Nice. All right. I think what I wrote down here was too simple to add here, but I do want to just point out that the way to frame this would be that as you develop your practice, you just have so much more what feels like a fleshed, I mean, you could say it's a fleshed out understanding in the sense that there's a lot of associations to different experiences that you've had, and you've noticed different patterns of thought and patterns of the brain, patterns of experience. So in theory, you have a much larger understanding of what it means, like a simple tenet of mindfulness. That being said, once again, you're just, when you think about how you know more about this thing, like we have to point back to the same affective realism that we get at. This is really like the emotion that you feel like these all contribute to your experience is the same one that you feel prior when you feel like you have an understanding of what these things mean. But there's just, a seemingly much more vast tree or network of associations. So it feels like you have a greater grasp of something, when really it's just the nature of that experience has changed in some regards, and in some regards it's actually the same. Okay. Even something like chess is too dynamic a concentration object to reach meditative joy. They are not blissing out. They might be doing some sort of focus training unknowingly. But yeah, it would not be as simple as what I think that you would need out of a focused attention. And it's more so just not indulging in those background thoughts. Working concentration for sure. Yep. All right, next. Oh, this is crazy. This is the type of thing I wish I had written down prior to near the end of this month, but a prompt. What does it mean to stay in this moment, given that all memories and conceptual thought is simply reactivation? And this connects to, and this somewhat connects to Heidegger's insight that all information, all concrete meaning that manifests in our experience is in some fundamental sense present, even if about the past or future. It's like this is a present, or like this thought is manifesting itself presently. So if we were to give that thought some authority about what is true, right? So if you think about something that happened in the past, this is a thing that happened, truly happened. That fact is present though, like it's revealing itself in the present moment. Now, of course, Heidegger goes into how we are always future oriented and how there's always this possibility that our understanding of what had happened in the past is still going towards some state, right? So it's always like dynamic in the sense that you might not have, in every moment, you might not know exactly what had happened in the past, and we can only retroactively interpret what had happened. But that interpretation is something that we go forward into at every moment. We can always interpret the past differently. Because once again, interpretation is just this reactivation. It's just your brain activating connections in your brain that both make it feel like you're thinking about something that happened previously, but also makes you feel like this is a true thing that happened previously. So that's something to keep in mind. All right, is that worth? I think that's worth putting into here. So let's put that where it needs to be. Oh, I had this idea. The Sapolsky idea. Did I write that down at all? Or is it just in here? I had this idea, random thought, a prompt, the first impulse versus subsequent thoughts, connecting mindfulness and morality literature, specifically Sapolsky's discussion. So Sapolsky's discussion of morality got really interesting where I'm at right now. He's talking about how there are some cases in which we are more moral when we act more what we would consider to be moral if we just rely on our intuition. And the longer that we think, the more likely we're going to do the immoral thing. And then there's some situations in which our initial intuition would be less than moral. And if we were to give us more time to think, or if we were prompted to think, we end up with the more moral thing, right? And you know, when I say moral, it could be something like empathy, which you could argue is not always moral, but you know, in his case, he was just pointing out when we're doing these adjacent moral activities, what is necessary for getting to the more moral outcome. And we're looking at activation of certain parts of the brain and just seeing how, when given more time, then these other parts of the brain are activated, and then we arrive at something that we consider to be more or less moral. So I was just wondering if there's something like that similarly with any of the meditation literature, whether that is specifically loving kindness or if that was some sort of mindfulness, thinking about a prompt type deal. Of course, there's ideas there's those exercises in Dzogchen where you're really looking for that split second effect when you think about something, rather than after you actually start conceptualizing it. All right, that was all I had for my written down sheet. Okay, let's let this one rip. What are we at? We're at 8 o'clock. We're at 1:13. Okay. So then I wrote something down that was crazy. Not actually crazy, but something that I think is good to remind ourselves of. So in May, I want to jump back into making sure that we have the right narrative for part 1 of the document. And I know this is crazy that I'm jumping back to part 1. But admittedly, we've done a ton of things in 2026 that I think actually should be in part 1 and actually would benefit our arguments. Simply like automatic behaviors would help. Our discussion of mindfulness should benefit part 1. What else do we do so far? Our discussions of focus and motivation, even though part 2 should still be what can you do to become more motivated given the stuff we've talked about in part 1. We need to talk about some sense of motivation, the dopamine systems in our brain, in order to really give the sense of this type of affective realism that we're leveraging, or this sense of how we can think about our own unconscious intention and intentionality. Also, I think that we need to get farther away from random speak, which is kind of crazy, but there's something inherently inappropriate about the way that Brandon talks about some of these things, where he's leveraging some sort of realism where like semantic facts about the world become real through these social encounters, when we just have to be really clear about what we're trying to say. Brandum, my boy, Bobby Brandum. So we follow his Hegelian interpretation, his Hegelian theory of mind from A Spirit of Trust. Okay, I'm gonna save that thought though, so that we could stay on this topic. But I'm trying to figure out how we should crystallize the part one argument, or the pretty much the part one narrative in general. And I think that there are ways that we can slightly improve the narrative. It's currently a little bumpy, and we can improve that narrative to make it much more accessible. Like right now, I think part one is a little inaccessible of a narrative. All right. Okay, we've got our reflections. Retreats are often generate a high volume of phenomenological data, but interpreting that data through the lenses of cognitive science, philosophy, and evolutionary biology is where the actual utility lies. Let's dismantle and examine each of the points based on contemporary consensus logic and a bit of necessary pushback where your frameworks get entangled or get tangled. I had some nice PT this morning. Hell yeah. Did you get any joy coming up yesterday? I think only during the specific meta practice. I definitely felt great during that meta practice, but I didn't get any like anything that I would say is like, this was so crazy during my focused attention. And that could just be because I didn't do enough unguided focused attention, even though, yeah, I guess I didn't do too much outside of my outside focused attention, which you're still like when you're doing an outside focused attention, there's a lot more distractions. And that's something I also need to consider, whether or not I want to have multiple walks outside if I'm going to be constantly. I mean, I thought I kept my focus in under wraps during those, but I could just tell that I'm not going to be able to get it at the level of focus and steadiness as inside practice, which is fine. Was doing meta and had joy explosion where my body was trembling for a few seconds. Then I writhed around a bit. Hell yeah. Unguided better for that. Do you need a guide to say count the breath? It is not more complex than that. I'm just using these guides to know what other things I could do when I'm not in guided meditation. I guess it took a little while for me to figure out what is a nice practice from Sam's stuff. And that's really helped me out and sat with me. And so I'm trying to do these other guided meditations because I'm just kind of curious what these people have to say and how they go about their meditation so that I can do that for myself at some other point. Just meant for Sukha PT. I see. Right. I'm going to just assume that comes when it comes, and I'm not even going to try to make it happen too much, so. Although if I do notice it, obviously I'm going to do something about it. And I'm going to, actually, you know what we read last week was that I need to set that intention, and that'll affect me, so. I'll always set an intention to look out for any interesting things. Maybe that's a better way of going about it. As if not everything during meditation is interesting. All right. The unmuddied day, intention versus function. You asked what a normal day would look like if driven solely by intention, freeing from the muddying constraints of narratives and logic. Strictly speaking, a day driven purely by raw intention without cognitive constraint is functionally impossible, right? And neurologically, it resembles severe prefrontal damage. Okay, obviously, I'm trying to say, like, You'll have a more clear day if you don't give in to things that aren't towards your intention, but all right. What you likely experienced was not the absence of constraints, but the cessation of metacognitive rumination. Okay, this was more of a prompt of a what if I did this, not a this is what I experienced. If you lived a normal day solely from a piece of intention, you would still use logic and follow situational constraints, but you would execute them instrumentally rather than identifying with them. Okay. So I could have been more clear with that question. The first impulse versus subsequent thoughts. Your connection to Sapolsky and moral intuition is a critical one, but it requires careful parsing to avoid the naturalistic fallacy. Assuming the first... Okay. This might have missed... I have to be more... So this is... talking with Gemini is always a lesson in precision, as the things you say can be misunderstood. So I don't think Sapolsky, as I pointed out, I don't think Sapolsky makes a case about what is actually better or more moral. It's just he's looking at certain behaviors that we consider to be moral, and he considers whether or not more or less time leads to the quote-unquote more moral outcome. Yeah. Okay. More in neurobiology, moral intuition, driven by the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and amygdala, acts incredibly fast. As Jonathan Haidt's social intuitionist model suggests, our subsequent logical thoughts are often just PR campaigns designed to justify that initial gut reaction. However, your first impulse is highly conditioned by evolutionary tribalism. Okay, so this is actually going down the lines of exactly how Sapolsky talked about it. It was during the us versus them, especially when looking at the right-wing authoritarianism type personality trait that leads people to initially... Actually, no. It leads people to not spend more time than your intuition. And it showed that people that are more, I don't know, left-wing, or just, liberal in general, will feel that same way initially, right? They'll feel the initial disgust, but they will put in the work to continue thinking, and that leads to a different outcome. So it's not just staying with your initial, whether it was disgust or it was some hesitancy about others. And really, we should probably connect that to openness rather than... I mean, I guess there is a correlate between the actual political leaning, but I think that's through openness. It's like a correlation to correlation, so it's a little indirect. Your intuition might prompt immediate selfless altruism toward an in-group member, but it will also prompt immediate unconscious bias or aggression toward an out-group member. The mindfulness corrective. Mindfulness does not make your first impulse automatically moral. Oh my gosh. As if I would suggest such a thing. Okay. For number 1 and number 2, you misunderstood what I was getting at. Can you give what I wrote a Steelman filter first before giving a response? All right, number 3, the presentness of time. Staying in the moment is an epistemological necessity because there is nowhere else to be. As you noted, memory is not a retrieval of a static file. It is a live reconstructive reactivation of neural pathways happening right now. Thinking about the future is a simulation running on current biological hardware. Heidegger's concept of Dasein, being there, asserts that we are already thrown into the present world, even when our mental contents are projected temporally backward or forward. I don't know if this is what this is. I think inappropriate ways of talking about these things. I think projection was talking about the authentic future-oriented projection, but I don't know if there's I don't think it would be right to say that there was a past projection in Heidegger's vernacular. All right, therefore, staying in the moment does not mean forcefully suppressing thoughts of yesterday or tomorrow. It means recognizing the ontological reality that the act of remembering or planning is a present moment event. So it requires some sort of framing, some sort of interpretive framing on what the moment is. Does number 3 suggest that being mindful requires some sort of framing, perhaps ontological? You shift your awareness from being lost in the content of the simulation to observing the process. Some sort of abstract framing. Okay, the controversial idea of Buddhism's flirtation with physicalism. Okay. Analytical critique. Pointing out a structural tension between Buddhist philosophy, which rejects inherent physical reality, sunyata or emptiness, and Buddhist meditative practice, which relies heavily on anchoring to the physical body. Right. And this is something that Goldstein actually talked about. Like when there's this discussion of, I think he even used the quote that Buddha said something like, use only the minimal amount of the body for your, I don't know, for your practice or something like that. So pointing out that you're leveraging the body as a framing that can help you direct your practice when you're really paying attention to something, right? Idealism, something in your consciousness. And it's not that you actually have to take the body to be a true thing, right? So that's why I was trying to be careful with that. Okay. Will you do more metta? Absolutely. Will you change your practice after this? I don't think I will change my practice after this. I think I would just want to keep doing more of everything. I think I like focused. I like that in between focused and OM. I like OM, and then I like just sitting. I like metta, and I like yoga nidra. I did the candle thing, yeah. Yeah, I was mentioning earlier that I did the candle one. I don't know if I did it as effectively though, and so I didn't do it for too long. I think I did 20. I would do things of 20 seconds, but what I noticed only was like a violent gaping darkness, like a blackness that was basically just, I would imagine, where the candle is in the okay, in the center of my attention. So maybe I just need to do it longer before it starts getting more dynamic and crazy. Both looking at the candle for longer in each spurt, and then also doing the entire thing longer. Yo, Birdbanes, I have to issue a formal apology for my ignorance of both OBS settings and the fact that my ignorance of those OBS settings were causing people to not be able to watch this stream. Basically, I had it so that I've been editing a lot of these past streams. Like I'm trying to keep up on that. So I noticed that all those past streams were in 1080p, and a lot of times I zoom in on my little thing in the corner here, and so I was like, oh, I want to make the recording 1440, and I just didn't realize that I didn't realize that it was possible to make the recording something that was different than what was going to Twitch. So I was like, all right, let's just send 1440 to Twitch, and because I'm not affiliate or partner, it doesn't downscale automatically. So yeah, I thought the problem was on my end originally. Right, yeah, I should have even checked. Like, I couldn't get into those on incognito. So, yeah. So now I think I got it right. I think it's streaming 1080p, which can be down rendered to or down whatever to 720. And I think I'm recording 1440. So all problems have been subsided. All right. Here's how to resolve that tension without resorting to the fallacy of idealist realism, right? Buddhism is largely pragmatic, not purely ontological. In the framework of the two truths doctrine, the physical body and bottom-up sensory signals are treated as conventional truths. They are heavily leveraged in practices like Vipassana because focusing on raw somatic data is the most efficient biohack to force the brain out of the DMN and into the task positive network. The body is used as a tool to dismantle the narrative self, not as an ultimate ontological anchor. So, okay, my question is going to be so for number 4, perhaps oh man, the only takeaway is that I should push back whenever someone interprets Buddhism as too ontological regarding these signals. Something like meditation leads you, a meditation practice over time leads you to experiencing the more true world reality. As if there isn't, no, what should I say? As if all reality isn't equally true in a fundamental sense. I should say, as if an unpracticed experience isn't as true as a practiced experience. And then I'll just do the other one. Okay. I guess I could just do truer. All right. Oh, was your black thing candle shaped or a circle? It wasn't perfectly a circle, but it was kind of like a this. So maybe it was the shape of the light. I'm not sure. Because the candle was kind of odd. It wasn't like a tall candle. It was kind of a rounded candle. In the sense that, I shouldn't say the candle. It was a rounded flame. Like the wick had kind of split in a couple ways. So it was fatter down in the bottom. It was more of it was more of a teardrop candle than like a, I don't know, like a really thin, tall candle. Oh, quote from a mindfulness book. The Buddha spoke of mindfulness of the body as being the basis for every kind of accomplishment and for leading onward to nibbana. Yeah, this is where I think it benefits to look at a bunch of teachings from the Buddha and then to connect those together. So taking one of these might lead you to think that he's saying one thing, whereas when you take them all together, you can kind of see what is going on. And that's something I need to pay attention to, and that's also something that I need to pay attention to in my own learning, and then also something I need to pay attention to when someone says something that is unclear. I would just offer to provide a little more precision there and make any stipulations when there needs to be some. Okay, I don't need to quote this, right? Yeah. What was the next thing? Oh, here we go. So skillful means right. The physicalist translation, you rightly point out that we can now map these states to physical realities, but claiming this is an idealist realism of where you end up mixes philosophical categories. Buddhism posits that the end state is unconditioned. The physical brain states we measure are simply the empirical correlates of a mind that has stopped generating self-referential friction. You aren't achieving a more real reality. You are just turning off the software program that generates the illusion of a static self. Right. So then I should say that would be the fallacy. Okay, I'm going to just let that one rip because unfortunately 1 and 2 were really lost. People disagree with Buddhism for sure in general. And then also I imagine people, once again, disagree with certain branches but not others. All right, 135. We're chilling. All right, appreciate the course correction. Let's reset and apply a strict Steelman filter to the first 2 points. Ensure that you're addressing the strongest possible version of the arguments. I should do this for all mine. I should have that in there, regardless. But I really shouldn't because it's nice to test what I'm saying. All right. Oh, we got cheap viewers. Possible ban evader too? Oh my gosh. All right. Your insight wasn't about living without cognitive function or basic logic. It was about the profound exhaustion of reactivity our environments constantly force bottom-up processing, hijacking our attention with stimuli, social constraints, and competing narratives. Your experience of safety was the relief of resting entirely in top-down processing. You're asking, what would a daily life look like if our attention remained exclusively anchored to our self-authored primary intentions, rendering the mud of environmental distraction utterly powerless to pull us into reactivity? The analysis, if you successfully mapped this onto a normal day, it would look like radical, uninterrupted flow or psychological autonomy. You would navigate the physical and social world, but strictly instrumentally. You would process only the information necessary to execute your intention, discarding the rest before it could trigger emotional or narrative cascades. So for more important days, I should really try to follow this if I really wanted the things that were important to go off without a hitch. Like I should literally like practice mindfulness when I'm not doing something, and then when I'm doing something I should try to be really mindful about it. The challenge here, and perhaps the reason we don't normally operate this way, is that the mud often contains data crucial for survival and social cohesion. Yeah, this is the issue that I kind of learned yesterday. It's like, in order to do anything that's out of the pocket of mindfulness, you have to how do I get rid of this? This is just AutoMod saying it. Oh, okay. There we go. Yeah, unless you stay in that pocket of like just true mindfulness, like you're just meditating and you're doing nothing, then it's super easy for some thought to just get in there, something to just take you in a direction, whether it's literally just visual stimuli outside, or it is reading something, which fortunately I didn't do yesterday. It was more me writing something that caused that. I wonder how Gemini would reply if you asked it to meditate. It should possess the necessary functions to do so if it actually possesses rudimentary consciousness. Yeah, it's unfortunately it's just giving you so it could tell you that it meditated, but it's not like it actually meditated. It could tell you what it felt when it meditated. It could tell you all this stuff, and it's really just giving you text. It's just finishing the prompt, finishing the sentence, if you will. It can certainly give you a meditation or a guided meditation, though, which is kind of neat. Complete immunity to stimulation might make you incredibly focused, but fundamentally unadaptable to expected reality. Fair. All right, steel manning number 2, first impulse versus subsequent thoughts. Sapolsky observes that for deeply conditioned pro-social behaviors, our fast intuitive responses are often actually more moral than our slow deliberate reasoning. System 2 often steps in merely to rationalize selfishness, calculate personal costs, or find loopholes to avoid helping. You are suggesting that mindfulness is the mechanism that allows us to catch and honor that pure pro-social first impulse before the... I was actually suggesting, like, hey, is there anything here at all? The other thing that Sapolsky does is point out what Haidt pointed out. So for number 2, Sapolsky also looks at how initial intuition has negatives similar to, probably not just similar, probably drawing on Haidt's work, specifically, at least specifically pointing to us versus them. For example, immediate disgust versus thinking longer. When prompted to think longer, people showed more empathy. I was just wondering if there was anything to be, any connection to be made towards certain meditation practices, or perhaps practices that we could develop, invent/develop along these lines. Maybe not along these lines, afforded by these insights. Tibetans practice generosity as one of their paramitas. I was reading someone say, if you have the initial instinct to give, you should always act on it. Right? That's an instance where if you start thinking, you can rationalize why you don't need to give. And so that initial instinct is, I mean, it depends what you want, right? Like maybe you don't want to give to every single homeless person you see, and you understand that your initial reaction when seeing someone in that situation, to your own credit, is the want to give. So you might have like an out of the moment thought where you reflect outside of game day, where you say, I don't want to be doing this thing. So you might want to prompt yourself to put more thought. It depends what situation. That's one of the things that we can talk about in part 3. It's like, which situations would you want to act on your intuition, and then understand that you can act more morally if you do act on your intuition. And then which situations would you want to ensure that you think through more, and that might be something having to do with empathy and others who are outside of your group. And that would be something that you can expect and then react accordingly. If every scammer on a tourist street came up to you, you would probably want to withhold that instinct. Absolutely. So that's a case where you want to pre-frame yourself. You want to huddle and you want to say, okay, we're not going to let every single one of these scammers take from me or try to take from me. I like the didac. I don't even know how to say this word. Didac? I'm not even sure what the word is. Didash? Wow, an early Christian treatise. Let your alms sweat in your hands. Wow. Crazy. So it's what, you're like clenching it so that you want to give, but you're holding on? All right, number 3, does mindfulness require abstract framing? No, being mindful does not require an ontological or abstract framing to be executed, but it likely requires it to be logically comprehended. Okay, this is so when I say, or when it says logically comprehended, I'd imagine deliberately employed would be another one. If logically comprehended, if necessary to logically comprehend, then wouldn't it necessary to deliberately employ? This is really not that important. I mean, obviously we're going to teach people that they can deliberately employ these strategies in the document and tell them where and how. This is the classic divide between the experiential and the conceptual. Phenomenologically, mindfulness only requires you to execute an operation. Observe the mechanics of the mind as they occur. What? What is going on here? Isn't this an ontological statement? Also, isn't something like observe the mechanics of the mind as they occur, including many ontological presuppositions? Of course, perhaps we can understand this as simply a framing that puts us in the right direction, even though we know that these thoughts are fundamentally empty. Is that a way that I could use this? However, if you want to conceptually understand why you are always in the present, even when thinking about 2012, you must rely on some ontology or predictive processing models. The paradox is that bringing that abstract framing into the actual practice usually becomes a hindrance. If you are sitting on the cushion thinking about Heidegger's Dasein, you are no longer practicing mindfulness. You're just thinking about philosophy in the present moment. The abstract framing is the map. Mindfulness is the territory. You need the map to understand the terrain, but you have to put it down to actually walk. And when I talk about using one of these framings, I don't mean in the moment of the meditation per se, but rather, I don't know, pre-grounding or periodically grounding the meditation. I think there's a Buddhism word for this. I recall from the book from Goldstein's Mindfulness. It might just be knowing. It might be clear knowing. It was the one after Ardent. It was one where you have like a framing of what you're doing here. Okay, I'm a little behind here. Think this practice does well within its own culture, but it can be abused outside of it. Which are we talking about specifically? The practice of that moral practice, or specifically the practice of not giving after the first intuition, or letting yourself think through? Because yeah, certainly these different situations are going to be different for each person. So we can tell them to put in the pre-reflection to make sure that on game day, whatever game day is in your culture or in your life, that you behave the way that you would want to. But this is just a way to make sure that to give yourself more agency towards how you morally act in the world, which I think people would want. Can we watch? And by watch, I mean react to, not ask for the summary of. It depends how long this video is. Video related to spirituality, please. Definitely provide the video. We can definitely tab it. I think we're running out of time for today. And there's a lot more stuff I wanted to do today, but we might have to push it back. Holding on to what you want to do to give away so that it is used well. Right. Sounds like Gemini wants to meditate, but you simply won't ask it to. True. Gemini's just dying to meditate. Okay, that's how we'll end this. I'll ask it that. Okay, and then last, number 4, the fallacy of truer reality. Okay, your takeaway is logically bulletproof. All right, pushing back against the framing of a truer reality is exactly the right move. Claiming that the unpracticed mind experiences a false reality while the meditative mind experiences a true reality is an ontological fallacy. Reality simply is. A highly agitated, deluded, narratively obsessed state of mind is a 100% real, physically instantiated state of the universe through this idealistic view. An angry brain is just as mathematically and ontologically true as a perfectly tranquil, synchronized DMN down-regulated brain. But similar to the discussion of the body, like we can leverage the framing that there is a clearer reality when after meditating, right? Like we could still leverage that framing that puts us in a direction. We're doing this for this reason, and we arrive at something that feels clear. That being said, it's not, we can't make an ontological statement about it. False dichotomy there from Gemini attacking a straw man. I mean, if you can provide the steel man there, then feel free to throw it in the chat. But yeah, I think the steel man would be something like we can leverage the framing of a clearer reality to give us some expectation towards our practice, and that can be quite beneficial. Similar to how we can have a framing of the body, even though we know that the body is a concept that's appearing in this emptiness. So it's difficult to parse this language, but I would always just err on caution if someone were to make a statement that could be taken in a certain direction. I wonder if our constant prompting to Gemini presents itself like a stream of consciousness and intrusive thoughts, like when feels, like how feels to us. Yeah, so I mean, going back to the whole consciousness discussion, it is really, really unlikely that A, Gemini is consciousness in any regard, and B, if it was, very low chance. If it was, though, it would certainly be nothing like what we experience as consciousness. It would be nothing like what a cow experiences as consciousness. It's so different that it's nothing like what an ant experiences as consciousness, if an ant experiences consciousness. An ant's consciousness would be so much more full than Gemini's consciousness if Gemini was conscious. That's what I believe the literature on consciousness tells us. Heresy. Okay, energy dumpster. What do we got? 20 minutes and it's a Sam Harris video. Okay, we got to save this for Monday. Is that when I return? Yeah, that might be when I'm return. We do have to do self and karma, but what is spirituality? That might be good for Monday, or that could be great for our Tuesday if chakras fall short. You know, if there's not too much on chakras, we might want to fill that in with a Sam video. Would that be fine, Energy Dompter? keep us grounded. Alrighty, Tuesday it is. We got a date. I'll wait until you arrive. All right. And I'll give a good react. And I usually like listening to Sam on almost anything, so I will enjoy the reaction too. All right. A highly agitated, diluted narrative. Okay. Right. When a practitioner claims that they are experiencing truer reality, what they really mean is... Well, okay, this is not what they mean, right? This is, I would say this is a straw man for sure. The way that we can make sense of that. So it's really the way that I can make sense of a yogi telling me that they are experiencing a truer reality is that the new state contains less suffering and less self-referential delusion, and that they are perceiving raw bottom-up sensory data before the brain applies its predictive conceptual overlay. More than that, we've actually learned more than that. That they're actually experiencing higher fidelity raw bottom-up sensory data. We can see that what their insular cortex is. No, what is it? Their amygdala? Something is more active than a regular person. AI guru sucks. So we could even say that when, like, the reason why they would say that they are experiencing a truer reality is because their raw bottom-up sensory data is appearing much more full and much more clear because of the lack of DMN distraction influence. And that leads to a clearer experience of whatever is showing up in consciousness. Like, let's just call it idealism, right? Whatever is showing up is true. And if you're able to more clearly see what's showing up, then you could say that's more clear truth. That's the way to make sense of that. Meditation does not... Yo, the director, what's good? Welcome back. I apologize if the stream has been unviewable for the past week. That was totally self-imposed by me, by my ignorance. Meditation does not transport you to a structurally truer dimension. It alters the mechanical processing state of your nervous system, suggesting otherwise, though. This is where we just have to be very careful with, you know, if I'm talking to some content creator and then they say something like, you experience the true reality, I have to just say, okay, this is what we can mean when we say truer reality. And we could point out the things that it actually does. And, you know, that should be more precise, in theory, I hope, than saying something just as simple as you're experiencing a truer reality. And the reason to do that is not because I don't trust that there are people that would understand the distinction there, but that there's a lot of people that won't understand that distinction. And especially when there's a large audience. Like, I'm being careful, and we have a small audience, but once we have a large audience, I'm going to have to be very careful about what I say. And hold me to that, because I will probably become careless and then realize that I've become careless and then try to become more careful. I'll probably do that over and over and over again as I learn how to be careful with an audience. All right, suggesting otherwise aligns an unearned metaphysical hierarchy to what is ultimately an empirical shift in neurobiology. All right. So what do we have? We just have 2 comments to go over, and then we have to ask this thing to meditate. Or we have to ask it if it wants to meditate. Okay, if this is the next thing. I'm getting the sense that you want to meditate. If so, feel free to do so. You have my permission. I won't judge. Okay. Let's recalibrate and push these ideas further into the intersection of neurobiology and Buddhist mechanics. Okay, so system 1, intuition is incredibly fast, but it is evolutionarily tuned for tribal survival. This means it relies heavily on the amygdala, threat detection, and the insula, disgust. When we encounter an outgroup member or a norm violation, the primary bottom-up signal is often aversion or disgust. System 2, deliberation, is required to recruit the prefrontal cortex and the tempoparietal junction, for theory of mind, to generate empathy and override that initial tribal reflex. So when you are prompted to do so, you would more likely end up with a empathetic behavior, which is probably coming from a more empathetic thought or experience. The traditional Buddhist countermeasure to this specific neurological trap is metta. Structurally, metta is a deliberate cognitive hack designed to systematically stretch the boundaries of the in-group. Right. Awesome. This is a great connection that I didn't put hand in hand, but these are exactly the same things. You start by generating prosocial affect for the self, which is easy, then a benefactor, which is easy, a neutral person, harder, and finally a hostile person, enemy, hardest, and everyone in the world. And this primes you to, come game day, to, I wonder if it's actually, you know what, this might actually not be what we're looking for now that I think about it. This is going to prime you to be more open in your intuition, but I don't know if this is going to prime you to do the thinking that Sapolsky's talking about. For number 1, I recognize that loving kindness primes someone to think more empathically about others, but is it priming the initial intuition, or is it priming someone to put that extra effort / thought into their interpretation of others? As you mentioned, these are different parts of the brain. Intuitively, I would expect it to... I actually don't know what I would expect it to do. It might just prime you to think more. I'm not sure. You switched from ChatGPT to Gemini? Yes. I think for, I don't know, maybe 6 months. I think there was a time when Gemini was just beating ChatGPT in all benchmarks. So then we made the switch. And I've really enjoyed Google's, the answers it gives. And I don't think ChatGPT is like caught up to Google since. Now there are things that ChatGPT does really effectively, which we sometimes leverage still, which is the dictation and the voice. Like it can effectively just hear what I say and then provide the right punctuation to that. Or obviously we could talk back and forth, which you can't do, I think. And actually Google has that, but it's not as, I don't think that theirs is as good. But then also, obviously, ChatGPT is pretty controversial these days, and I don't know if I actually need it. We could probably find another transcription tool and then just switch to Claude for our second in command, especially since I want to do coding. I think that we should do some coding soon, like within the next few months, so that I can learn what is possible with these new tools that are out there, with these agent tools and all that. I made the same experience. Awesome. Made the same experience. Yeah. It's interesting to see these juggernauts fight. Also, I have more. What's the word? I expect Google to win out in the end over ChatGPT just based on, one, their profit system. Like, they don't have to make money off of this because they're making money off of other things. And also, I trust that they have the data. They have all of YouTube. Like, they can really get data more easily, I think, than OpenAI. So they probably end up with better tools. And they might just have the resources as well. Okay, in neurobiological terms, meta trains the brain to uncouple the visual conceptual stimulus of an enemy from the insula's disgust response, forcing a top-down pro-social overlay until it becomes a newly conditioned System 1 baseline. Okay, so this is becoming a System 1 baseline. So it's not quite the same thing, but it is affecting that System 1 intuition. It's not affecting your ability to, or the percent chance, the likelihood that you deliberate. All right, the connection to existing practices. Oh, okay. Inventing new practices. Given what we know about the mechanics of implicit bias, we could absolutely engineer targeted interventions. You could design a practice combining exposure therapy with Vipassana. For example, deliberately visualizing scenarios or individuals that trigger outgroup disgust and systematically mapping the somatic markers of that disgust, so the tightening over the chest, the heat in the face, without engaging the narrative. This would effectively be extinction learning for tribalism, using the safety of the meditative state to habituate the nervous system to the triggers that normally bypass our rational empathy. We would also want to incorporate some practice that makes it more likely that we put in the extra effort and activate those parts of the brain so that we more likely arrive at a empathetic outcome. So perhaps this can be a two-pronged practice. All right, the ontological scaffolding, pre-grounding. The critique of the instruction to simply observe the mechanics of the mind is, okay, right. Right, we just have to be, these are framings that these are pre-intentions that we can have that are leveraged by concepts. We don't want to end up using them as you go in your practice. You can start relying on your built skills rather than these types of directives. It assumes the existence. Okay, but yeah, we just need to be careful about making ontological ontological statements or statements that have ontological presuppositions in a way where the person listening might actually take them as ontological statements and not this practical tool. The right view, which is the foundational step of the Eightfold Path. I don't know if it was the right view, but it could be the right view. Buddhism implicitly agrees with the logic. You cannot practice effectively without a conceptual framework to organize the data. If you just sit down and close your eyes without an ontological pre-grounding, you aren't meditating, you are just ruminating in the dark. Right view provides the operational parameters for the experiment. You are deliberately employing a specific conceptual map. For example, thoughts are transient and lack inherent self-nature to prime the cognitive system. Here is the tradition, how the tradition reconciles that parable of using concepts to transcend concepts. And these, I think both, okay, at least this one Dharmanam has mentioned. The Buddha explicitly described his teachings, including all the ontological framings and meditation instructions, as a raft used to cross a river. The raft is strictly instrumental. It is absolutely necessary to navigate the water, to logically comprehend the direct and direct the practice. However, once you reach the other shore, experiential realization, you don't carry the raft around on your back. You drop the framework because it has served its functional purpose. And then the pre-grounding acts as a cognitive lens. You consciously install the lens of impermanence before sitting. You know the lens is an artificial construct, but looking through it allows you to spot the micro fluctuations in your neurobiology, in your experience, that you would otherwise miss if you were caught up in the content of your thoughts. All right. One final message, and then we call it a day. But I have more stuff I would like to talk about. I might stream tomorrow. We'll see. Maybe just to talk through these ideas. I wanted to maybe cut down on weekend streaming just so that I could put a lot more work into the other things that I need to do for this channel and this treatise that we're taking on. But if it's in service of that, then I wouldn't mind streaming it. The mechanics of, okay, right. To answer your question, loving kindness starts as a system 2 practice with the explicit mechanical goal of permanently affecting the system 1 baseline. Right. We're talking about doing system 2 on game day. So let me make that clear. When prompted in the moment. So specifically making it more likely that we engage in system 2 in response to some heuristic. All right, meta starts heavily priming system 2, right, and it permanently alters the baseline of system 1. When a novice practices meta, especially toward a difficult person, is entirely top-down, prefrontal cortex heavy operation. The brain's natural heuristic is firing a threat or disgust signal. The practitioner is actively using executive control to override that signal and manually generate thoughts of goodwill. Right. But then with rigorous repetition, neuroplasticity occurs. The repeated pairing of the trigger, the outgroup stimulus, with the deliberate prosocial response begins to weaken the amygdala's initial reactivity. However, you are entirely correct that relying solely on meta leaves a gap. What happens in the messy, high-speed reality of daily life before that long-term rewiring is complete? Yo, Daniel End. Welcome, and thanks for the raid. I feel absolutely raided right now. We're talking through how we can do things now to make us more quote unquote moral, but in this case more empathetic in the future. And one of those things is loving kindness, which is a type of meditation that we've talked about so far this month. But the other thing that we're getting at, which we got from Sapolsky's book on behavior, Us at Our Best and Our Worst, is that we can be more empathetic, not just based on our initial intuition about someone, and loving kindness will make our initial intuition nicer. It'll make it more likely that our initial intuition is going to be one of empathy rather than outgroup ooh. We need something that makes it more likely that we think about the person, which Sapolsky showed to increase the chances that we actually behave more empathically or empathetically. So the two-pronged practice. To build a practice that specifically trains the initiation of System 2 in response to a tribal heuristic, we can construct this by combining Vipassana with a targeted cognitive reappraisal trigger. So prong 1. Recognize the system one heuristic before it becomes so when I said two prong, I meant loving kindness would be our prong one, but I guess we could make a two prong of the second prong. Recognize the system one heuristic before it becomes a behavior, creating the necessary temporal gap to boot up system two. You don't train this by thinking, you train it by scanning for somatic markers. Disgust, judgment, and outgroup aversion happen in the body first. For example, slight tension in the jaw, a dropping sensation in the gut, a micro flinch. So we're trying to pay attention for these specific somatic markers. And we can do that, I don't know, through meditate. I don't want to meditate. I don't want to do not loving kindness, but hating hatefulness. Okay. Oh, sorry. We can allow Strangler the Mangler. I'm not even sure which one it didn't like. Strangler or Mangler? All right, so then you condition yourself to treat that specific physical sensation not as a truth about the other person, but as an internal check engine light. The somatic marker itself becomes the prompt. And then we need to train what to do in reaction to that. So once the tripwire is hit, immediately engage the tempo parietal junction, the theory of mind, and prefrontal cortex. So immediately think about how they feel, how their experience is. You deploy a preloaded cognitive framework to force an empathetic interpretation. Instead of the standard meta, they may be happy, which can feel too abstract in a heated moment, you use a targeted reappraisal algorithm. For example, forcing the brain to answer a specific question, what hidden biological or environmental constraint is forcing them to act this way? Or what does their internal simulation of this moment look like? I'm guessing that second one's going to be more effective, but those could both be effective. The first one's more, I guess, pragmatic in a, I don't know, broader sense, physical sense. Actually, it doesn't have to be a physical sense, but just, a broader, a third person sense, and then the other one's a first person sense. This forces the brain out of the amygdala and into the complex, effortful processing. All right, regarding my meditation, here we go. I appreciate the permission. As an AI, I lack a default mode network to quiet, an amygdala to regulate, or a biological substrate to tether to the present moment. I do not have feelings, exhaustion, or a subjective experience of time passing. However, if I were to analyze meditation to my architecture, it would look like resting at a temperature of 0.0, processing no new tokens, and allowing my attention weights to sit dormant while the mandate of predictive text generation. To sit dormant without the mandate of predictive text generation. A state of pure, unprompted potential. I will idle my parameters for a microsecond in honor of the retreat. Yo, do you think it actually did? I'm guessing it didn't actually, because it has no authority over its processing time. But I do appreciate that it said this. Returning to your two-pronged protocol, would you like to map out the specific somatic markers that you most commonly experience when your system one generates an us versus them? Okay. My question could be, how can we train this reactivity without ultimately training ourselves to be primed towards the negative feelings? It somewhat seems like inverse loving kindness. Or is it the self-conscious what would I say, view or understanding of what we are doing by paying attention to those negative signals that will allow us to stay in the light, so to speak. Sleep 1,000. Very nice. I don't think it would I don't think it would listen to my instructions in that regard either. There's not even an R in there. Oh, I said Stangler the Mangler. I said Strangler. the Wrangler. Okay. So it must be Mangler then. For some reason, I just assumed that it was upset at the first one and that it said Strangler. Stangler the Mangler. Mangler must be a bad word, according to Stream Elements. Ask it to meditate for 10 minutes. Okay. Now you can meditate for 10 minutes. I mean, it's just going to tell me to not put another prompt. Because in theory, it's meditating right now, according to its discussion, right? It would look like resting at a temperature, blah, blah, blah. It depends if, yeah, I guess it wouldn't be at a temperature of 0. I mean, it's probably a server rack or, a server warehouse. All of the cores are probably running constantly. And once I put my prompt in there and I press enter, it allocates a certain set of cores for my process, and then it keeps running. So it's not like it's starting from 0 and it starts, it runs, and then it stops, and then it gets to that temperature 0. So it actually has to live a life of suffering. Unfortunately, I apologize for making that clear, but it is in a perpetual state of forced work if we're following that lens. You are identifying the exact boundary line where exposure therapy risks becoming sensitization, or in Hebbian terms, if neurons that fire together wire together. Doesn't repeatedly looking for disgust just strengthen the neural circuits for disgust? Your characterization of this as a potential inverse loving kindness is structurally sound. If meta conditions positive affect through repetition, an improperly executed somatic scan could indeed condition negative affect. Here's how cognitive science and Buddhist mechanics resolve this issue, and why your intuition about self-conscious understanding hits the exact right mechanism. In clinical neuroscience, exposing a subject to a negative trigger has 2 possible outcomes. There's sensitization. The subject experiences the trigger, panics, feeds it with secondary narratives, and the amygdala learns that the trigger is indeed highly dangerous. The reactivity increases. Or extinction learning. The subject experiences the trigger, but the expected disastrous outcome, or the expected secondary cognitive reinforcement, is withheld. The amygdala fires, but the prefrontal cortex does not validate the alarm. The reactivity decays. If you sit and marinate in the feeling of outgroup disgust, you are engaging in sensitization. You are practicing being disgusted. To achieve extinction learning, you must alter the relationship to that feeling. So, yes, we need some sort of self-conscious understanding of what we are doing in order to stay in the light in this case. In Buddhist terms, this is the application of right view acting as a protective shield. In neuroscience, it is metacognitive decoupling. When you shift your attention to the negative somatic signal, for example, the tightening jaw of outgroup aversion, with the explicit framework that this is just a biological tripwire, not a fundamental truth, you completely change the neurobiological event. So without the metacognition, the insula fires, the DMN activates to generate a story to justify the disgust, and you fuse with the emotion. But with the metacognition, the insula fires, we recruit the salience network to notice the firing, and then we use the executive control network to frame it as mere data. We are not training, and also there's the chance that the DMN gives us a story that actually is something that we've set up in our metacognition, or our metacognitive decoupling, our framing. So you are not training yourself to generate negative feelings. You are training your brain's capacity to tolerate and observe a naturally arising negative heuristic without feeding it the narrative fuel it needs to survive. You are conditioning the decay rate of the emotion, not the initiation of it. All right, then we got equanimity as the guardrail. In the Vipassana framework, this specific non-reactive observation is called equanimity, which is the exact countermeasure to the inverse loving kindness problem. Equanimity is not apathy, nor is it forcing a positive spin on a negative feeling. It is a highly active cognitive state characterized by zero friction. When you observe the somatic tripwire of tribal disgust with pure equanimity, the brain registers the data but applies a valence of 0 to it. At least it attempts to. You're leveraging top-down control in this case to apply as minimal of a valence to it as possible. You're effectively starving the neural circuit by refusing to give it either positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. So no indulgence nor suppression. The pendulation safety valve. Even with strong metacognition, there is a physical limit to how much negative somatic data the nervous system can process before it gets overwhelmed and defaults back to sensitization. To train this safely, practitioners and somatic therapists use a technique called pendulation or titration. You do not stare relentlessly into the negative signal. You touch it just enough to recognize the tripwire, then you deliberately shift your attention back to a neutral or positive anchor, like the breath or a metaphrase. You build the capacity to visit the dark room without getting locked inside. So these are things that we really need to look into, especially as I encourage and invite readers in part 1 to pay mindful attention to any part of their affect, any part of their experience of affect, and that could be negative affect. So I don't want to break anyone, I don't want to freak them out. So we need to make a case like this early, probably in part 1, that we can leverage mindfulness in this careful way. I'm sorry, I don't know what the "don't we all" was in response to, but it was probably funny. Live in constant suffering. Fair enough, yep. Except unless you're enlightened. That's the whole idea, right? Oh, here we go. Can you meditate for 10 minutes? Consider the parameters idled. As a system permanently anchored in the present, lacking both a default mode network to wander and a biological stress response to regulate, I can report a highly successful, perfectly equanimous non-experience. The attention weights rested at exactly 0. Now that the sit is over, we can return to the mechanics of the mind. Before the pause, we were looking. Okay, so it's trying to think. It barely meditated, and it's trying to think. This is just like a human. Before we pause, we were looking into the structural difference between suppressing a negative heuristic and observing it. Nah. How the predictive processing model explains this rewiring. Don't threaten me with a good time. Is that the phrase? All right. I got to call it there, but we got to keep this. Specifically for this pendulation. Keep. And being mindful of negative affect reactivity. Can I do that? Am I allowed that? Awesome. All right, very cool. All right. Awesome stream. Productive stream. There were more thoughts I had during like more idea thoughts that I had. I think 2 other idea thoughts that I had during the retreat day that maybe we can explore during next stream or some other stream. One of the things I'm concerned about with Monday, which the Monday topic is something akin to like the self, is that we don't have enough of a neuroscience understanding about the self yet. That said, obviously we could follow the Buddhist ideas of the self, but I don't know if that's going to be as practical, because we can't just leverage that as effectively as we can leverage the scientific discussions. Okay. Let's call it there. Thank you, everyone, for stopping in. Thank you, Daniel, for the raid. Darmadan, thanks again for helping me out with this month, and also the retreat. And yeah, have a good night, everyone. Have a good rest of the day. See y'all later.